And everyone, and welcome to the CSH seminar. Today, we have the great pleasure and honor to welcome Aparna Vaidik to the seminar. She's professor of history at the Ashoka University. Her writings on India during British rule are wide-ranging in the topics they tackle, from environmental labor and Indian history, Indian Ocean history, to the history of Indian nationalism and revolutionalism, including the colonial politics of violence. And besides numerous articles and book chapters, her publications include several monographs. The first one was published in 2010, and it dealt with the Andaman Islands under the Raj. And the latest one, about which she's going to talk to us today, revisits the 1929 Lahore Conspiracy Trial, and thereby offers yet another perspective on the revolutionaries of the Hindu Socialist Republican Army, who were already at the center stage of her earlier waiting for Swaraj. And so to discuss her revolutionaries on trial, we are very fortunate to have the equally prolific Aditya Nigam with us today. Based at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, Professor Nigam is a political theorist whose latest monograph, and please correct me if I am wrong, so Decolonizing Theory, not this one more. So you have to update your websites. So please.
It's okay. Actually, update is that I retired from CSDS 2 years ago. So their website has an older.
Maybe we will learn more about latest publication of Professor Nigam later. But anyway, his work on nationalism, socialism, and political subjectivities in the context of post-colonial India will, I'm sure, shed a very interesting light on the issues raised by Professor Vaidik and provide food for today's discussions. So just to add a few words on the seminar flow, we'll start with a presentation by Aparna Vaidik around 45, 50 minutes, followed by a discussion of 15 minutes by Professor Nigam, and then we'll open the floor to offline and online discussions. And two practical points. Online, please turn down your mics. And here, offline, remember that when you want to speak, you have to press the button and see the red light coming. Thank you. And Aparna, please go ahead and be here today and contribute to the CSH seminar.
Okay, so you have to look there. But before I start, so thank you, Corinne, and thank you, Nigam sir, for agreeing to come and be a discussant. So, and thank you, CSH for inviting me. Okay, so I'll take you through some interesting bits about how I went about writing this book. You can look at my face now. Now, once the PowerPoint comes up, you can enjoy the PowerPoint. It has lots of images, not really a lot of text, but just so you get a flavor of the kind of research a historian does on a topic that nobody thought had anything to be written about anymore. Okay, so what you have in front of you is one poster and one page, the front page of the Tribune, just to give you a sense of how the news about Bhagat Singh was reported about the trial. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about trial before I dip into more sources. So this is just for visual pleasure. Okay, so the book is about this trial called the Lahore Conspiracy Case trial. Now, the trial itself was from 1929 to 1930. Yeah, but I'm looking at from about 1928 to 1931. So that period defined by the trial. So just to give you some information to hold on to before I show you some images. So who was being put on trial? Because I'm assuming not everyone will know. I thought there will be more sort of non-Indian history folks here. So it's members of the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, and they were also known as Army. So the acronym is HSRA. It was formed in September 1928 in Delhi's Firozshah Kotla grounds. And what they were accused of, and now why I'm saying what they were accused of and not saying what they were guilty of, is because at that time, most Indians believed that this was simply an accusation, that they weren't really guilty of these so-called crimes. So it was believed by the state, by the police, that they assassinated John Saunders, a British police officer in Lahore in December 1928. And they had bombed the Delhi Assembly, and they had also undertaken a dacoity in Bihar. Now, the bombing of Delhi Assembly had already been tried separately. And you may know that's the famous Delhi Assembly bomb case in which Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt had been tried. And they had been sentenced for transportation. But once this case started, that case was brought and mixed into this one, and they were retried for bombing the Delhi Assembly. Yeah. So I'm putting it out here because, different pieces of writing actually get some of these facts incorrect. People think that the Lahore Conspiracy Case trial was only for assassination of John Saunders and had nothing to do with the Delhi Assembly bomb trial. No, it was they were being retried, and there was a dacoity also that they were being tried for. Okay, and another sort of important fact that is crucial for the narrative of this book is that the trial took place in 2 phases. So first was a sessions trial, which is a lower court trial, and that lasted for about a year, from July 1929 to June 1930. And then the governor, tribunal, a special tribunal, an emergency ordinance was passed and a tribunal was formed, which had 3 judges. And that was supposed to expedite the trial. Yeah, and that undertook the trial and started in May 1930 and finished in October 1930 and passed the judgment. Yeah, so the first part of the trial took place in Central Jail, and the second part was in this bungalow called the Poonch House. Yeah, and they were sentenced in 1930, and finally it was in March 1931 that Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru were hanged. Now, the story that you've heard of so like when I started working on this and when the book came out, people are like, what new can be said of this trial? Because we already know this story. It's been done to death. We all know it. Even the school children know it. So what is it that this book does for you? So, well, it does a lot. And I'm going to tell you what it does. So because the story of the trial that we have is the special tribunal, the proceedings of the trial were published. And the first few pages were summarizing the sessions trial. So nobody had actually seen the records of the sessions trial. What up until few years back was just a summary of the sessions trial. Yeah, and when the trial under the special tribunal started, the revolutionaries were very upset about it, the HSRA men. So many of them, and they would fight they were fighting the state, right? So they didn't even go to the court. So the trial was held in absentia. Yeah, and they stayed in the jail and they did hunger strike. So it is the story of hunger strike that has generally been told. Like when they talk about Bhagat Singh in jail, they're telling you the story of the hunger strike. And they're telling you the story of this part of the trial, which was under the special tribunal. And so this has given rise to, certain assumptions about the trial. Yeah. So the story of the Lahore Conspiracy Case for many years, for several decades, was told as a story of the special tribunal and the story of the hunger strikes. Yeah, and it's yeah. So the revolutionaries were believed to be not have spoken. Yeah, the silence was seen as what they and they spoke through hunger strikes and all that. Yeah, and that has created its own way of writing. Like revolutionaries in jail, hunger striking in jail are seen as satyagrahis. Some people have said because Gandhi was the one undertaking hunger strikes, but I feel that that's a lazy formulation because several revolutionaries before them were hunger striking. This is what the revolutionaries did when they went to jail. Yeah, and what Gandhi was doing was fasting. That was very different from hunger strikes that these revolutionaries undertook. So it was a very different form of resistance, but that has become like conflated with Gandhian resistance and all of that. Okay, and the other way, so one is the story of the hunger strike, and the other is the story of the trial has come to be told as the story of miscarriage of justice. That rule of law was flouted. It was not observed. So then what else do you tell? There is no, once that has been said, what else do you tell in terms of the story of the trial? And the third element of the way the story had been told was the focus on Bhagat Singh as a lone wolf. However, he was part of a group of revolutionaries. And so how does this imagination of this revolutionary who's by himself and alone gets forged? Why is it that there's so many others who are part of that group, and he was part of the collective because he saw himself as part of the collective? I don't think he saw himself as a lone wolf. So how does that imagination get constituted? Yeah. So, well, these are my questions, but that's what the story of the trial generated, a certain kind of imagination about the trial. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just show you a few more images that reinforce the way we have been thinking about the trial. So you see, these are all the movies. The first movie on Bhagat Singh came out in 1954. The reel is called Shahid-e-Azam Bhagat Singh, and we have lost the reel or the role. Like, we don't have the movie anymore. Yeah. So that movie is it's lost. But we have the story from the archive. And this is the famous Shahid Manoj Kumar movie. And then there are others. In 1990s, there were about 5 movies, Bhagat Singh movies. So you see the cinema, the popular imagination, one continues to draw on this, the lone wolf imagery. Yeah, the Bhagat Singh as the sole leader and the, being at the forefront. And the other is, it keeps reinforcing the hunger strikes. Yeah, as if there is no story other than that. Yeah. And actually, interestingly, the trial's name in the records is Sukhdev versus the state. So the trial's main protagonist was actually Sukhdev. And so it's interesting how the popular memory shifted. And the book is really about demonstrating how the popular memory shifts. And even the historic review here, it's the most famous book by A.G. Noorani, Trial of Bhagat Singh. So again, instead of trial of Sukhdev and versus the state, it became trial of Bhagat Singh. Yeah. And, as I was writing the book, this book came out. And then I was like, I shouldn't have taken 15 years to write my book. I should have written it quickly. So Satinder Singh Jas is the only other, he's a lawyer actually by training. So he's the only other author who's seen the records of the Sessions trial. So, but then again, his focus is again law, and he's telling the story in a particular way, which feeds into the larger narrative of miscarriage of justice. Yeah. So this is the only two books that tackle the trial for itself, its trial story. The rest are seeing it as a backdrop for a biographical narrative of Bhagat Singh, or they're seeing it as a, as part of the larger, like the story of the hunger strike, or, the larger story of nationalism. So like that. So that's the way the story has been told. Now what I'll do is, you have a little bit of background, how the trial story was told. I'll tell you my journey with the trial. How did I went about piecing the story? Because I feel the form in which we write, the historian's craft and the content of what we do are both implicated in each other. So I think for me, the book is also an intervention at the level of craft. So how do you tell these stories? How do you tell complex polyphonic stories of the past? Because it's very easy to flatten them out. Tell them, you take one biographical entry point, and through that you tell the entire story. But what happens when I'm trying to tell the story through the lives of several people? Or there are several different perspectives that don't add up or contradict each other. Then how do you even tell the story? So, yeah. So the very first thing that I found in the archive, which was a chance finding, you can look at the images, they're actually fun, is this letter from this man called Hansraj Vora. Yeah, the letter is dated 1980, and it is to this man called Mathuradas Thapar. And I found this letter in the Mathuradas collection, the private papers in the National Archives of India. Now, who is Mathuradas Thapar? He is Sukhdev's brother. one of the three people who were hanged at the end of the trial. Sukhdev's full name was Sukhdev Thapar. Now, there was one thing amongst the revolutionaries, they tried not to use surnames. Yeah, Bhagat Singh went as Bhagat Singh, and that was name. It was not like surname. Yeah. So, and Sukhdev just went as Sukhdev, but he was actually Sukhdev Thapar. So in 1980s, Mathura Das, Sukhdev's brother, is writing a book, a biography of Sukhdev, because he felt that there weren't any good biographies out there. And he reaches out to one of the fellow HSRA young men, named Hansraj Vora. Now, this correspondence, when Mathura Das passed, his wife deposited in the National Archives. And it was waiting for some historian to turn up and see it. It was just sitting there for like 3 decades, right? Now, what about the letter? Now, who is Hansraj? Now, Hansraj was 17 years old when he was part of the HSRA. He was a young man, and he was really devoted to the nationalist cause, and he had been brought into the HSRA by Sukhdev. And he was also a distant relative. I think that he and Sukhdev were also related to each other. Now, when the trial started, Hansraj Vora was one of the people who took the stand against his HSRA fellow revolutionaries. Yeah, so he is, like, several terms can be used to describe him. But the one I use is renegade. And that's also, like, I use it for a particular reason, because we can call him a traitor, we can call him a turncoat, and several other things. But all those terms are, I feel, categories generated by nationalism. These are terms carrying certain degree of moral, moral insistence of it being wrong, this person being somehow having a shade of darkness to it and all that. And also another term that is used for people like Hansraj is approver, that is king's witness, sarkari gawah, yeah, or gawah-e-sultani. So that again is a legal terminology. So I skirt both, and instead I use the term renegade revolutionary, because until the end of his life, he was committed. He was a patriot. So here is a letter. Okay, now back to the letter. Now you know who Hansraj is, who Mathura Das is. Now Mathura Das writes to him, asking him, why did he testify against his fellow revolutionaries? And as I read through the letters, I was hooked. I was like, this is the topic I'm going to work on. This is the thing I want to write about. Because, you know, you have stories of heroes, right? Here is a man who, all of 17, who testified against his own fellow revolutionaries. And I was like, why? What happened? And in the letters, he gives his reason. Yeah. And I'll just show you one letter, which I have. This is a typed version. Okay, what I want you to pay attention to is, Hansraj described himself as a political leper, consumed by grief over the turn of his life has taken. He composed a small poem expressing his plight. Once I had a friend, a leper friend was he. Could you shake by the hand? Chorus, oh no. Could you look him in the eye? Oh no. Could you sleep with him? Oh no. That was the tragedy. So clearly he saw himself as a tragic, hero, I don't know, but as a tragic person. And in another place, he says in the letter, on the top, he says, mine has been a most difficult life full of risks, but so far, touch wood, I have emerged virtually unscathed, at least physically. But the memory of the 20s accompanies me doggedly, teasingly, hauntingly. I hope by the time I die, I would have been fully forgotten. This is my only ambition. And this line actually, I was like hooked. It's like all of us want to write books and become immortal, right? This is what we are trying to do by writing books and producing scholarship. No?
I'm sure he's not forgotten.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to his memory. Okay, so the historian comes in and says, "Ye na ho paega. This won't happen. I'm going to bring you back to this thing, but I'm going to tell you a story more gently, instead of just like consigning you to a moral sort of dung heap, or just turning him into a legal category." So anyway, so this was Hansraj's letter that I found, which was full of pathos, which had a lot of, so I was like, so the question for me then became, how does one write histories of betrayal? How does one write histories of anti-hero? How does one write histories of when nationalism is fractured? Yeah, because it is so easy for me if I just wrote a book on Bhagat Singh. that would be an easy book to write. Yeah. So how do I even tell this story? So that was the first source I found, and this started my quest, my research. So I call it the quest. I'm influenced by Percy Jackson. Yeah. Which I read last summer to keep up with my teenage sons. So yeah, okay. So the next source were the next stop. Okay, my PowerPoint is still a little messed up, but anyway, you know this. This is from the Teen Murti Library or the Prime Minister's Museum Library. There are several oral history transcripts there. They had an oral history project in which from late 60s to about early 80s, where they interviewed several surviving revolutionaries and nationalists. And there are about 50 odd transcripts related to the topic I was looking at. So lots of good work, and they're all in either in Hindi or English. And and these oral history transcripts are interesting because they are not just about the trial, or they are not just about the little things, but it's about their daily life as a revolutionary. What did a revolutionary do in a den? What were they doing? What were they planning? What did they laugh about? What did they, where did they get their fruit from? Where were they getting their money from? Who said who? But another interesting thing for me methodologically was that they tend to have conflicting facts also in them. One person will say one thing and the other will say, no, he's lying. This is what happened. So in several places there was discrepancy. And also this is memory. Somebody went and interviewed them, and the kind of questions they asked, you got those kinds of answers. So this is not like just a source in the archive. It is a source which is one step removed. And also sometimes you remember things well, sometimes you don't. So a little bit of play of memory was there in these transcripts. So over here, I found another transcript, which is by, again, Mathura Das Thapar. Yeah. So not only his private papers were in National Archives, but his oral history transcript, which was part of the PMML's oral history collection. So he was interviewed, right? Now, in his transcript, there was an annexure about another revolutionary. Okay, over here. Well, I'm not able to read it from here. It is a Punjabi from Firozpur, age something, government, So it is a government document talking about a revolutionary from Firozpur. Yeah. And this young man who's been described here was the famous writer, Hindi writer, Yashpal, one of the most progressive part of the progressive writers movement. And here, this is implicating him as a double agent. Yeah. So see, I'm finding series of records, and then I find this juicy tidbit. Yeah. And then I go back, because I have not heard about it. I go back and start consulting several historians of Hindi or Hindi literature. And people have heard it, not heard it. Nobody was willing to verify it. So again, I'm finding new materials and different ways of, I was like, okay, how does one tell a story of this guy who's like till today, like you have in the Hindi BA curriculum, you read Yashpal. If you're doing history of partition, you will read his Jhuta Sach. So it is, you can't, here are people who have defined the way we are thinking about some parts of India's past. And here is a document which is saying something else about them. So like that. So this is the second thing I found amongst several things that I found. Okay. Now then I go to Lucknow, and you see I'm moving from city to city, different cities, and I'm finding new materials. Now this is actually a photo of my bookshelf with only half the books that I found on the revolutionaries. So there was a whole lot of printed material there. Yeah. Printed material in terms of memoirs, correspondence, writings, reminiscences of the revolutionaries. There's a whole lot out there. And a lot of it is inflected by the need to remember the past for posterity, and also by like the misses in the, like drops in the memory. Yeah. So there are conflicting accounts and all that, and there's some repetitive accounts and like that. So the quest is yielding more, and then it continues, and then I reach Lahore. Because now you remember, I was telling you that the trial took place in 2 phases. People had not seen the records for the Sessions trial. Now there's one publisher who gave me a tip off. He said, the records, they are there, and they're in Lahore. So I was like, okay, now I need to get to Lahore. So I get to Lahore, and I did find those records, but I had to go repeatedly and beg for records. Yeah. So the places I went to was the Lahore State Archive, the Police Museum, National College of Arts. Well, I went to several places, But the place where I found the Sessions trial record were in the Lahore State Archives. They were neatly indexed and kept in supposedly in a box. Okay. So a little bit my introduction to the book talks about my Lahore field trip and sort of the political undertone, or maybe I should say overtones that it had. And sort of, yeah, I want to be safe and not say too much. You can read the book. So just a sample of things I found there. So this is a letter written by, can you see what it is? Because I can't. I'm just thinking what I if I can open my PowerPoint, my computer, I can tell you more about it. So this is it's a letter. I'm just checking who signed it. Yeah, it's Bijoy Kumar Sinha. So BK Sinha, the one Bengali revolutionary who wrote Indian Bastille. So what I'm trying to show you is a sample of a letter, handwritten letters that they wrote as petitions. So the record had a lot in it. Now here is what you see on the screen is a sample of Bhagat Singh's writing, because several, they were in the trial, several experts were called, like bomb experts, chemical experts, medical experts, handwriting experts, that to establish the veracity of the material that the prosecution was presenting. So here is a sample of Bhagat Singh's handwriting that was taken from him and then submitted to the court. Can you guess what this is? Yeah, body measure, huh? Yeah, so this is Saunders' post-mortem report. Yeah, and the bullet marks on his body. So you know exactly where he was hit. So, some, like, for historians, this is juicy, but I don't know how it is for you guys to see all this material. But it's like, wow, this is the way he was killed. Okay, now I know. It was a petition asking for something. Yeah, I can enlarge my thing on the computer. Yeah. Yeah, so is it possible for me to see the proceedings in a particular way, ask for something? So some sort of a petition, yeah. And there were several of such petitions in the documents. Okay, and this is actually a map that the police drew of, like, this was the where Saunders was killed and how the revolutionaries ran and went into DAV college and how they made. So there were police investigation reports in it, not only trial proceedings, but police investigation reports and also the exhibits. So like you've got some document from somewhere, then you show, the prosecution shows it as an exhibit. So all that material was also there. And this is the famous FIR of Saunders' murder. Yeah, so when once he was murdered in the police chowki, an FIR was registered. So this gives now why is this important for a historian? Because FIR is the first report, right? So it gives the record of what happened from the perspective of the guy who was writing it. But when you see the trial records, the same, so when the trial takes place, they have to reconstruct the murder, the crime scene, right? And it will be reconstructed from different points of view. And sometimes, a lot of time, not sometimes, there's a lot of discrepancy. So when I'm writing, I'm like, okay, which account am I going to go with? The FIR or what the witness's account, eyewitness's account. So, and that's the challenge of writing. See, if I were William Dalrymple, I could make a fantastic story out of it. But unfortunately, I'm a historian and I have to be honest to the records I'm writing, right? So, I didn't mean, okay, sorry, I didn't mean it like that you can be, but I can't dramatize, right? I can't, if you're a novelist, you have that facility. But as a historian, I have to stick to what is, right? But when the what is has a lot of contradictions, how do you even write it? Which account am I going to say, okay, this is authentic? Because how is one to know? Yeah. And this is, yeah, so this is an old style Urdu in, I don't know, maybe a Kufic script or some script is different. So I had somebody over there come in and translate it for me. So a lot of these records could not be read by somebody who just knows Urdu. It's a particular kind of a script which somebody helped me with over there. Yeah. Okay, so now you have a sense of the kind of records, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. There was a lot of record there. Took me forever to, and other than the court proceedings. Yeah. Okay. Then my next stop was looking at newspapers. So see, again, I'm talking about the Sessions trial, the first trial. Now, that trial was reported every day in the newspaper. And you see, it had this kind of coverage, the entire page. It was not like a small column tucked in on page 3. Yeah, or it was not the, it was the news in Lahore for 2 years. Yeah. So then looking at, if you've seen the microfilm in Teen Murti, it takes you forever to look at these records. So the Tribune has digitized them, and you can see them in the Chandigarh archives. So then the next stop was the Chandigarh Tribune, this thing. And I was able to get the daily transcript of how the press people were looking at the trial and reporting it from these records. Now, what's unique about these newspaper reports? Now, they are reporting the trial in real time. So say the judge asked a question and somebody replied and everybody laughed. So I know that everybody laughed because the reporter is saying in the bracket, laughter. Yeah. Or in the bracket, they're saying yelling. Or in the bracket, they'll say slogan was raised. Okay. So the atmosphere of the trial is captured by the newspaper, because at that time, the newspaper is trying to make it as vivid as possible for the readers. Yeah. And what I'm showing you is few pages, but the reportage was 1, 2, 3 pages also, because the daily transcript of trial is there. Yeah. And then I was surprised that why no one has turned to this, because our imagination was hijacked by that published special tribunal record, as if there was nothing else about the trial. Yeah. So yeah, this and Hindustan Times, and then there were, there were nearly 20, 30 everyday magazines and journals and all in Lahore itself that were reporting on the trial. So this was one of the most heavily reported trials in late 1920, in 2930. So yeah, so this was again a set of records that were there. So now what do I have? I have a lot of sources, right? I have court records, memos, colonial archives, personal papers, newspapers, and oral histories. Now, how does it all come together? And I have already mentioned that it's very difficult to pull the story together because the records are not always speaking in the same language, they're polyphonic. Everybody is speaking in their voice. And and at times it's difficult to establish what is the truth. Like the first time I found Hansraj's letter, he's actually accusing a fellow revolutionary of having betrayed him. So he says, I did not betray, I was betrayed. So I started following the track of the revolutionary, that the guy who's actually a renegade has accused another revolutionary. So I followed on the tracks of that guy. So it's, where is the truth and what does it mean to be objective was getting questioned for me. And as you know, for our historian's craft, these are the two guardrails. And some other records had completely shaken that for me. I was like, okay, is Hansraj lying? Or is he telling the truth? But if he's telling the truth, it's a really damning truth. And how do I write a story out of it? Because the revolutionary Hansraj was accusing was Sukhdev. He said Sukhdev is the one who gave out the information to the police first. And when I found that out, I decided, it was not worth dying for. So I was loyal to the country, but I didn't feel I needed to be loyal to the people who had already betrayed. Now, once he's made that kind of accusation, I'm left wondering, okay, is Hansraj lying? Of course, he'll be lying because he's a renegade, but then there are the oral history transcripts that were substantiating some of what Hansraj was saying. Yeah, so it was as if an old conspiracy was unfolding for me. Yeah. Okay, so this is where one is stuck with one's sources. Now, the second thing was historiography. What is it we have in terms of historical writing on the subject? So there were two kinds of historiography. One is nationalist and hagiographical, where it is all praise, all goes celebrating the great martyrs of sons of Mother India, that kind of writing. And the other, which is more recent in last 10 years, is more nuanced, revolutionary histories of the revolutionaries and histories of violence, which had critiqued this idea of rule of law, like that the British ideology of rule of law was really a myth and the violence was embedded within the law. Now, the historiography had already said this. So I was like, okay, what is my entry point? What is the story I'm trying to tell here? Yeah, so, and here I'm focusing on narrativization because some of you might have heard of Paul Ricoeur. He makes this point in time and narrative that our arguments are embedded in the narrative. They're not outside of our narrative. So the way I would narrativize was the way I was making my argument. Yeah. So therefore, the problem of narrativization was something that, I was stuck with. So how did I resolve it? Okay. Now you would say, what is this Japanese film poster doing on my PowerPoint? Yes. So I took heart from Rashomon. Okay. Like I can't do Kurosawa, but I can do Vaidik. So I thought, like, at least let me take inspiration from somewhere. So this is the movie poster of this movie called Rashomon. Now some of you may know it, some of you may not. I know it's one of those things that many professors use to teach in their classes. So it's one of those nose up in the air kind of movie also, black and white. So, but the movie is really about a murder that takes place in a forest. And we know about the murder that took place in the forest through 4 different sets of people telling the same story. And they all tell the story differently. Yeah. And when the movie ends, you're like, huh, who did it? So it's not a who done it, which tells you who done it. Yeah. It's like something that confounds you. But what the movie is doing is it's telling you how narratives, juxtaposing different narratives, and even the juxtapositions give rise to another picture. Yeah. So I thought I would go with this because that's the only way I could make sense of the material that I had. So I also have 4 narrators in the book. Yeah, I'm the narrator, but there are like 4 people in the book, and they are organized like the trial. So the trial also had 4 sets of protagonists. So one is the colonial state, the other is the revolutionaries, the third is the renegade, and then the press and the public. So the narrative is of how they made sense of the trial. For the colonial state, what did the trial mean? What were they trying to do with it? Why trial the revolution? So these are the questions that I asked then. Okay. Why did the colonial state put the revolutionaries on trial? What was the need of the trial? Yeah, like when it came to the Kuka rebels, they tied them on the in front of the cannons and just blew them off. That technology was available. They could kill. The British state just could simply kill. Yeah, like in Kenya, the British had simply killed the Mau Maus. They were completely crushed. Yeah, so the state had that technology of violence. So why bother with trialing the revolutionaries when you could just kill them, blow them off the cannon? Yeah, and what was the state seeking to do? Why are all the revolutionary trials known as conspiracy trials? What is it? Why are they being called conspiracy trials? What does it really mean? Because the Lahore Conspiracy Case trial was not the first conspiracy trial. It was in line with several other conspiracy trials. So how do we understand the very idea of trial? Then the second related to the revolutionaries, what meaning did the trial hold for the revolutionaries? Yeah, because there was a presumption in historiography and in a lot of writing that the revolutionaries never spoke in the trial. But here was reams and reams of paper, them speaking ad nauseum. They wouldn't stop speaking, right? So, and in the oral history transcripts, they were talking about their trial strategy. This was part of the larger strategy that they had come up with. So what meaning did the trial hold for them? Yeah, how was the trial a space or the court a theater of revolutionary resistance? How did they convert? Because if you meekly sit down in the court and let the proceedings happen, then you wouldn't be a revolutionary, right? You had to do something in order to be a revolutionary in the court. So what form does resistance take in the court and in the jail, and why? Why are they choosing certain forms of resistance, and and what does it do for them? Yeah. So those are the questions I ask. And then about the renegades, my question, as I said it from the beginning, how does one write history of betrayal? Is it even possible? Because all history of nationalism or all history of resistance is celebratory history. Yeah, there is. Do we really have histories of betrayal? I would wonder. Like, have you guys ever read anything? You would have read histories of collaboration, right? But are there histories of betrayal out there? Yeah. So, and I was like, okay, how do I even frame my arguments? How do I even write about it? And also, many of the people who renegaded, what was the context of that? Is there only one black and white context of are you with us or without? In today's also, you have somebody is a national and the other is anti-national. It's a very quick binary to have. It's a very lazy binary to work with. Yeah. So how do I even work with this? Like, how do I think through this material? So that was other question. And then for the press, what role did the press play in creating the public image of the revolutionaries? Because you see, from the evidence that we have, when they bomb the assembly, people are actually condemning the act of bombing the assembly. Everybody is saying, okay, sirf rahe hain, they are all this, they are in a hurry, they are, they are, ahead, trying to turn the wheel of history too quickly and all of that. So they're receiving a lot of brickbats, but by the time the trial ends and they're hanged, the public imagination about the revolutionaries has significantly shifted. And a large part of that is the daily reportage of the trial. So how does the press respond to it? How does the public respond to it? And in fact, one thing I didn't mention when we were looking at the newspapers, not only is the news being reported, but there is the editor of Tribune is this man named Kalicharan, who's come from Bengal. Yeah. And he's one of those really firebrand editors. And the number of editorials he writes. Yeah. And at this time, not only Tribune is reporting, Civil and Military Gazette, which is a British sympathizer newspaper, they are also reporting on the trial. And the tenor of Civil and Military Gazette is completely different from that of Tribune. So there is an editorial warfare also going on, by other means in Lahore at this time. Yeah. So the role that press and public play in the trial. Now, do you want the answers to these questions that I raise? Quickly? Huh? This is the thing where you're supposed to go and read the book. Yeah, but I'll quickly give you the little bit of answer. Quick, we have enough time, or yeah. Okay. So I think this is the last slide I had removed. I just had to speak after this of what does it do. Okay, so why is the state putting them on trial? So what I'm really and why are the trials being called conspiracy trials? How are conspiracy trials different from other kinds of trials? So conspiracy as a term, yeah. So they use this. Okay, I won't go into the technical thing, but conspiracy is referring to a crime. For something to be a conspiracy, it has to fulfill 3 criteria. Yeah, one, it has to have, there has to be a covenant between 1 or 2 more people. I alone can't do conspiracy. Yeah, there has to be more than 1 person. Yeah, it's like me and she getting together and saying, let's go steal some bananas, or let's go hit that person. Okay, so there is the verbalization of intent, and then the other is the covenant. You have to agree to that. Yeah. And the first is that there has to be more than 1 person. Second, there has to be a verbalization, and third, there has to be a covenant. Now, whether we went and stole the bananas or not, or whether we went and hit the person or not, is irrelevant. Yeah, the fact that we verbalized our intent and there was a covenant is enough for this to be a conspiracy. And maybe we agreed, right? We verbalized, and after that, 1 person went away. They say there's a group of 5 people, 1 person went away. They didn't even participate in the actual this thing. Like, say we are going to go and bomb the Viceroy's train, right? So there were 5 people who were sitting there. This was verbalized. Some people agreed, yeah, and 1 person did not even participate in the bombing, but still they would be culpable. So here, conspiracy was referring to a crime that may not have been committed, actually, physically. Yeah, it was a crime that was simply an imagined crime. Yeah, and the contours of which were not clearly defined. Yeah, and that is what made and that is tied with the idea of being a revolutionary. That you guys are playing by subterfuge. You are going to show yourselves a little, but you're going to hide. So we really don't know the contours of the revolutionary spread. Yeah. So now what the revolutionaries used to do is they would send letters to each other. But not all letters were secret. Some letters were meant to be intercepted. Because you know what happens when some letters are intercepted? The state is not able to make out how many more are there, right? So that was their ploy each time. So like you have, when Saunders was murdered, posters were posted all in several places. So then they're thinking, oh, Saunders is murdered in Lahore, but the posters are being seen in Bengal also. So what is their this thing? But they are a bunch of 5-10 men only, right? So you can look bigger, you can look more in numbers than you actually are. Yeah. So that's why all the revolutionary trials are known as are not known as revolutionary trials, but conspiracy trials. And also, they're not calling them revolutionaries, no, all the time. If you call them revolutionaries, you're dignifying them. Yeah. So the other element in the British this thing is of sedition. Yeah, because sedition is also, and it's pertinent to our times also. Sedition is again an imagined crime or something which doesn't have clear contours. Yeah, because sedition is happening in speech, in verbiage, yeah, in words, yeah, or in writing that is circulating. And how much is it going to circulate? Yeah, so like somebody is saying Inqilab Zindabad. Now that in itself can be sedition because it's a sound that is penetrating. It's an unshackled sound, right? So they'll say, oh, don't slogan because it's seditious. You can be talking about several things, but then end of your speech, if you say Inqilab Zindabad, it will become seditious. So this idea of a revolutionary, conspiracy, and sedition come together in the way revolutionaries are treated. Yeah. So yeah, trial is, and also to, it makes the British look good. We are doing our due process, but the due process itself has violence embedded in it. So I don't need to hit because I make sure that my law itself embodies that ability to kill. So that is the trial. Then what meaning it held for the revolutionaries? Now you see the revolutionaries, the active life of a revolutionary, if you've seen Battle of Algiers, yeah, an active life of a revolutionary is not more than 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And if they are ideologues, they can last for a decade. So you see, what is his name? Yeah, Aurobindo Ghosh, and there is that Sanyal, Sachina Sanyal, who wrote Bandi Jeevan. So I don't know if many people think of Savarkar as a revolutionary, but again, somebody who saw himself as such, and other revolutionaries also saw himself as such. So many of these ideologues sustain because they are not part of any active action in that way, right? But the ones who are in active action don't last very long. So these revolutionaries also knew that we may not last very long. So, and we may get killed. Yeah, we may get hanged. So best strategy is to keep prolonging the trial because the duration of the trial gives us a chance to do propaganda for our cause. So like in the court, they will ask, like all these renegades were there, no? So Bhagat Singh will ask them, do you know how to make a bomb? So he'll say, yes. Okay, how do you make a bomb? So the man is testifying, and from the court, he's telling everyone how to make a bomb. And there are press people sitting there, they're going to take notes and print it in the newspaper. So the bomb recipe has gone out, right? So think about it like that, because bomb, okay, very quickly about the bomb also, why are they resorting to the bomb? Because the bomb, you know about 1857, no? The gunpowder will get wet. Yeah, revolvers are very expensive. There was Arms Act. Yeah, so it's very difficult. So if you want to do something effectively, make a bomb. But Indians didn't know. So some Bengali refugees went to Russia. They learned how to make a bomb, but they memorized. Huh?
To Paris.
Yeah, to Europe. Yeah, and yeah, to Paris. To Paris. And they memorize the recipe. You don't write it down, right? You memorize the recipe. Now you're going to be hanged, right? So how do people know the recipe? Today you can Google it, but at that time you go to the court and tell the people about it, right? So they're using the court as a platform for giving out information. Then they ask, what books are you reading? So the renegades will, tell all the books, give the entire reading list. Now young people know what to read, right? Like that. And they're also exposing false witnesses. So what I argue is that in the act of cross-examination, they are allowing themselves to be witnessed. So in cross-examining the witnesses, they are allowing the revolutionary lives and what they do to be witnessed by the general public. So the trial is very important to them. And to keep prolonging the trial is very important. Yeah. And there are other things also. So for that, read the book. Then the renegades, how does one write the history of betrayal? So not only did I find Hans Raj, I found several other people. And this was the most complicated part of the book, which stalled the book for many years. I couldn't write it in a way that I felt was doing justice to the material. Yeah. And also many of these people, we are barely 95 years away from the trial, right? Have I got it right? Yeah, I did. So the children of many of the revolutionaries are still alive, who would be in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And there was this thing also bearing down on me, that I didn't want to write in a way which was completely slamming everyone and saying this is wrong and that is right. But how could I write with more empathy? Yeah, while not distorting the truth, while not distorting the facts that I had, but also understanding the context, because many of them are just 17-year-old. Yeah, and their families did not want them to die. So what do you do to save your child, and what do you do, all of that. So yeah, so I think that writing histories of betrayal are very important. Think through the idea of betrayal is very important, because it really widens the scope of nationalist histories. It makes them less celebratory, because we keep critiquing the idea of nation or nationalism, but empirically, we keep reproducing it. Empirically, we say, okay, it's not there in the archive, like that. We'll critique it. We'll see it as a epistemic impossibility in some ways. Yeah, but at the same time, we'll reproduce it in our writing. So I feel that this telling the stories of betrayal is equally important. Yeah. So and the last is again the role that the press played. So the key one argument I make over there is that what the kind of imagination that the press creates is that these revolutionaries initially are being critiqued for their violence, their espousal of violence, or the use of bomb or assassinating and all that. But the image that the press manages to create of the revolutionaries is revolutionaries without their violence. So violence becomes something that the state does and not the revolutionaries. Yeah. And a key aspect of martyrdom is that you can't be a martyr unless you are witnessed. Like shahadat has to be, I think etymologically also the word shaheed is the one who's been witnessed. Yeah, I don't, maybe I'm getting, who is the witness also. So the idea of witnessing, and the press bears witness. Yeah. And that is what allows the revolutionaries to become these revolutionaries who are not known for their violence, because the violence shifts and becomes something that the state does. And then the revolutionaries then turn into these, the terms that are used for them are noble ascetics, while the travel is going on. So from Surfera, people who don't know their, in English, what will you say? The people who are misguided, wrong-headed, and all that. From that, they go to being seen as noble ascetics, and from that, they go to being seen as martyrs. So that it does, and the public rallies around them. Yeah, and then I think I close my argument by saying that, but this is like an effervescence. It's like a soda. You put the soda and the bubbles will come out and then it settles. So the revolutionaries, this trial is more like an effervescence. It comes out. There is a lot of rallying around the revolutionaries. There's a lot of rapture. But once they're hung, the memory of these revolutionaries survives in the folk and the popular. But it doesn't feed, like the beneficiary of this memory becomes the Congress. Yeah, because right after this is the Karachi Congress, and the revolutionaries are remembered. There, there's a lot of, there's a memoriam and all that. But after that, it moves on. It just moves. So what I'm capturing in this book is also that moment of effervescence. Yeah, which is there, very significant, but doesn't really carry on. And it's only in post-colonial India, when there is a movements of resistance, that they go back to that moment in history. Like the Naxalites would go back to that moment in history, or when you have the Tebahaga and all that, then they will go back to that moment in history and pull it out. But it doesn't feed the active politics in that way. So, yeah, I had prepared some more, but it was just about that. I think most points I've covered, and yeah, I think I can stop here. Yeah. Okay.
Well, after that fascinating presentation of what the book deals with and the material it deals with, and the kind of questions it tries to confront, there's not really much left as a discussion for me to say. But I do want to raise some questions which were coming into my mind, not sometimes questions, sometimes just passing thoughts which were troubling. I mean, overall the book is very troubling and disturbing. Partly because even for people like us who perhaps theoretically concede that there is the kind of way in which a figure like Bhagat Singh or the HSRA people are remembered has already an overlay of a certain kind of ex post facto deification, especially the three Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, Sukhdev, who were hanged and thereby achieved martyrdom. But when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of the material that Aparna presents, and I think this is I mean, from the very word go, because it comes up right, the Hansraj Vora appears right in the introduction of the book. And in a way, till then you don't know, of course, that even Sukhdev is going to be under the scanner for apparently having made a statement to the police. But gradually, one by one, every single character, I think the only person who remains unscathed at the end of the book is Bhagat Singh. So probably Bhagat Singh's trial and the reason why it is remembered as Bhagat Singh's is probably because that is the one figure you can still hold on to without any you don't feel like there is something shady about having to do that. But as I read through the book, and this is I think the big challenge that the book has taken up and has dealt with, I think, quite well. How does a figure like Hansraj Vora actually renege on his comrades, his commitments, and maybe not on his commitments? I'm not very sure even now. And I think that is the important part of the book, that it doesn't actually resolve for you all the conflicts and contradictions. So in a sense, I think this is one of the problems with our earlier understanding of history, that we think it gives you the truth. History will absolve me, as Castro said. Or even now, I think a lot of our struggles are around, if we tell people the historical truth, then everything will be fine. But there is no historical truth really, because, or if at all, it's inaccessible, because you really don't know. So this particular episode, the thread which runs through, is absolutely fascinating for that reason, because after all this, Aparna doesn't find any document on record of Sukhdev's statement to the police. The colonial authorities were actually so meticulous in documentation, as she herself remarked in the book, and that documentation and archiving and so on. This one thing is not missing. It's not there. It only circulates in hearsay. And the reason it gets strengthened is because at some point Sukhdev apparently himself also accepts or acknowledges to a couple of his cohort that he did make a statement to the police. But otherwise, most of it is circulating in kind of rumors and allegations, counter allegations once people start getting arrested. So this is something which actually brought to my mind that this has happened repeatedly actually in all underground movements. You can see it even in the Naxalite movement. You can see it in a whole lot of these Kashmir stories and so on. An underground movement by definition is a movement where you never know when the person sitting next to you has turned, or whether he or she actually came in as a double agent. So at every moment, you're actually confronted with the possibility that the person you trust most might actually be the person who's betraying you. So this is, in a sense, very characteristic of practically all underground movements, that and that is why the lifespan is very short. That's why you can't carry on a movement like that beyond for a very long time, because there is always the maximum limit where somebody somewhere will probably spill the beans. Here it happened faster because two actions, one after the other, had taken place. One, Saunders assassination murder, and then the assembly blast. So there was obviously, and the two got connected very rapidly. And so the other one is quite fortuitous actually, because there they had no evidence initially at all, the Saunders murder case. And so I think from your assessment also, it seems that they might have escaped. Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwara Dutt might have escaped the gallows had not the Saunders case come in at that point. And so that is one kind of thing which actually kept appearing at different points of time in the book, and which was kind of very, very disturbing at one level. Disturbing also because then you have this story about Yashpal, and now there too, of course, there is one part of the story has to do with Yashpal's love for Prakashwati, who herself ran away from home one night because the parents were insistent on giving her in marrying her off while she wanted to join the movement. So she lands up at Yashpal's place, and they fall in love eventually. But the thing is, this violates the code of Brahmacharya or whatever of the organization. So there's a lot of heartburn, there's a lot of suspicion and so on for him. But I don't know still whether there's actually any hard evidence or of any side. So a lot of it actually again has to do with the mode in which underground organizations function, where nobody is really at the end of it trusting the other person, and everybody probably thinks the other person is a police agent or has already been drawn into the police net and so on. But in some accounts, we know that they made up between Chandrasekhar Azad, who's apparently was probably the most angry at this relationship, and who probably thought Yashpal was very seriously compromised. But there seems to have been some sorting out. And so what I'm saying is that, but all of this is only circumstantial. All of this still leaves all the loose ends there. And I consider it to be a strength of the book, rather than trying to resolve these tensions in the accounts. But what happens with this, and this is the second point which actually interests me, is once you open out this whole story again, and you start looking at each participant and each character closely and their accounts, and from, I think, the range of archival material that has been accessed, you get a very, very fine-grained account of the different people involved. And what it does, of course, is also that it opens out a whole series of other questions, which in the sanitized histories memorialized after the event, we don't usually perhaps want to remember. So there is a certain kind of repression of memory also. And here I'm thinking of the also the way in which then the heterogeneity of the movement and of its participants, the organization's participants, comes alive. So we know Hindustan Socialist Republican Army, it was named socialist because Bhagat Singh believed in socialism and so on, and we believe that all of them were probably socialist in the same way. But there are Azismajis like Chandrasekhar Azad who remain religious till the end. There are people like who are Vedantists, and there are people who are kind of different persuasions, who have some vague idea of socialism, perhaps, some of them perhaps not even that. But I think that it's very important that once you start getting this picture of the diverse range of positions, let's say ideological positions, political commitments, and so on of the different people, and how they nevertheless manage to actually function as a fairly unified and cohesive team till, of course, the events take them over. Then it's a different ballgame altogether. But till then, it seems, and I'm not sure how, from the sense that I get from your account, is that it remains, I mean, it doesn't become the kind of contentious battles and splits that we see in many other radical organizations, where it's like whether you use the word semi-colonial or not will lead to a split in the organization. Here, like, there's a range of differences between them, but those are not the reasons why they are together. So in a sense, the commitment to a cause which is more immediate, where the larger ideological inclinations or proclivities are probably put in abeyance. So I was actually thinking of more, let's say, the contemporary far left Naxalite kind of groups, where this has happened a lot. The kind of splits that happen over just the ideological positions and formulations. And in that sanitized account, of course, a lot of things do get lost, the accounts that we prefer to use and to remember, which I think in your conclusion, that's the very important discussion of the habitus in the in the public sphere, the print sphere, so to speak, and how probably, again, with the exception of Bhagat Singh himself, the others, even Bhagat Singh, I think, on the question of Hindi and the question of Hindi Urdu kind of becomes a little iffy, right? Because it's very easy then to portray if you adopt the vantage point or standpoint of Hindi as the national language and as the voice of the nation, then Urdu as outsider, Muslim as outsider, and Muslims' commitment to Urdu and so on, it becomes a very, very standard binary, very difficult to escape even for someone like Bhagat Singh. But with all the others, in fact, it's much simpler, and at some level, they're also reading Savarkar. One of them eventually ends up as an RSS, working with an RSS journal, though many of them, of course, become communists later. So I think what was striking to me when I was reading all this and this discussion, particularly in your conclusion, is that also because it ties up with my third point, third point which I wanted to raise, which you discuss quite at length, the binary between the nonviolent movement and this continuous demonization of the violent revolutionists as something alien to Indian tradition and so on, and non-violence as something which is like characteristic or defining feature of Indian society. And I think the two, to my mind, tie up. Historians might be able to tell better. One of the things I'm still trying to figure out, but I'll put it here nevertheless, is that on both these things, a lot of stuff since the 19th century, or maybe even a little earlier, late 18th, early 19th century, starts happening with the colonially instituted binary of the tolerant Hindu versus the fanaticist Muslim. And the fanatic Muslim is something which comes via colonialism with the baggage of the Crusades. I have serious doubts because there's not much evidence of that kind of, I mean, there are conflicts, there are conflicts of all kinds going on all the time, but they're like, you don't even have the name Muslims, right? You are sometimes Turks, you're Afghans, you're, I mean, various, your ethnicity is what's being referred to. It's not the Yavanas. Yavanas is the generic category. But this binary of the tolerant Hinduism versus the fanatic Islam is coming straight via colonialism with the baggage of the Crusades. Crusades, I seriously, I mean, I'm putting forward a hunch, but it seems to me that this is actually something worth exploring, because, and from there, this division in a way which runs through in both these cases. So I'm not necessarily saying that these people are drawing it from, there's a longer history from which it has already taken place. But by the time this is happening, the field has already been structured in such a way that if you're a nationalist, you're somehow, you have to question the allegiance of the Muslim and so on in some fashion. And that even Bhagat Singh is not able to escape all the time. So the question of violence, non-violence also seems to me to be a very, very important point here to discuss, because Savarkar of all people is actually one who refutes not just Gandhi, but his whole attack on Buddhism is precisely that there was no such thing as non-violence in Indian society or Indian culture. And Buddhism, in fact, made Indian culture effeminate and ineffective in the face of foreign aggressors. But the actual tradition of ours was always valor and etc. etc. Now, that too is a construct. I'm not saying that what Savarkar is saying is right, but the point is, as in the case of these people, it's very difficult to essentialize whether Indian culture was always tolerant, what tolerance, when you see it in terms of the caste oppression and so on and so forth, is one question. What is the tolerance in terms of its history of violent inclusion of forest populations inside the mainstream? So all these are things which lie at the background, so to speak, of these things these two questions that you raise in the conclusion. And I just couldn't help going back to that. So yeah, I'll finish here. Thanks.
Very, very much, Aditya. Would you like to respond to the comments before we take some questions?
I'm also thinking about it. So you would be able to say to that, no? Tolerant Hindu, and how do you feel about it, Corinne? You would know more about earlier constructs about, no? But I'm thinking this is an Orientalist construct also, right? Of this imagining the Hindu as the tolerant, because it's a thing of spiritual East and the industrial West. And that sort of fits in well with this Crusadic sort of imagery also. So I feel that lots of different imagery is coming together. And again, are we trying to look for an essence? When we're saying, is it violent or non-violent, and the martial tradition, I think all of it existed. It's people go to the past and pick up what works for them. Yeah. Whatever works for you, you take that from the past, and yeah, it's up for grabs. Yeah.
On that point, I mean, there's nothing like an essence of Hinduism, which in itself is a construct, as we say, which, as we know, which was far more diverse than it has come to be. And the same can be said about Islam, but you're very right, I think, in saying that from a European perspective, Islam and Muslims were the old enemies. So there was a tradition of demonizing Muslim that played again when British were confronted with a Muslim population in India, in the subcontinent. That's for sure.
I was just, not that I can recap his argument right away, but Manan Ahmed's book, Loss of Hindustan, where he looks at the Chachnama and the imaginations of Hindustan and all of that. And so I think that book speaks to what you were saying about how we imagine the past, how we imagine different communities. Yeah. I think that's all the response I had, because I'm also thinking about it. Yeah.
But thanks for it's important to have an account like this, which is not trying to just bring together.
Yeah. I couldn't write, like the Yashpal section also, took me forever to write. And then I was like, okay, how am I going to write it again? Movies do help. So what you can do is create a montage, right? A series of juxtaposing series of accounts about what happened. And then what I did, I placed his wife's, Prakashwati's account of what had happened, the last. That was my way of giving her the last word, because I felt that many of these revolutionaries were absolute misogynists. The way they were talking about her was totally unfair, right? And as if love is forbidden. So I was like, okay, whatever your thing may be, whether you did this or not did do that, the way I constructed the juxtapositions, okay, this one said this, then in the end, I was like, okay, this is what she thought. So let her have the last word. Although I don't know, I can't say for sure. So, just the thing of hard evidence also. What will we call hard evidence? Like for historians, that's like, again, our discipline has been sort of, either you can be a positive historian and just say, this is what happened, that is what happened, and here is the fact. But I think all that has been destabilized anyways for us. So in trying that, but then the danger is when you're not trying to be a positivist, then what are you? Because you have to say something. So so I think that's the way I dealt with it, because I really don't know. You can't know. So, and that's like, it's quite scary to encounter the limits of your own, discipline in some ways. Yeah. We don't have full explanation. So but we can try.